Hello and welcome to Vigilant Software. Today's demonstration is going to be focused on our vsRisk version 3.0 risk assessment software. The demonstration is going to be broken down into 5 individual segments, giving you an introduction to the tool, ISMS creation, risk assessment, control reviews, reports and dashboard, followed by settings. The first section is going to walk you through creating your ISMS upon installing the software. As you will be able to see on the screen, this is your welcome screen that you'll be prompted to. The sample company will be included, which can be used to build your ISMS. Alternatively, you can build this from the ground up. So we're going to select New ISMS. This will open up a second screen where we can start going through and adding in the name of your ISMS and your organization. Today, this has been automatically populated, so we've got IT Governance Limited as our organization. The ISMS name is the company name followed by ISMS, the lead assessor or display name, followed by an email address which is linked to the Active Directory. Active Directory can be toggled on or off at this section by using on for integrated security, and once we're happy with all of this information, we can go ahead and select Next. The next point will be our control set selection. This will enable you to toggle on or off individual control sets based on the risk assessment you're going to be using moving forward. We can either leave them all on if you're going to do a more thorough risk assessment, or we can simply deselect the options we're no longer going to need if we're focusing mainly, for example, on the ISO 27001-2013 controls. We're then going to select Next, and this will take us into our management scales. These will be purely dependent on your entire organization's requirements, but however, they will give you a full scalability, so you may want to run it on a 5x3 grid for impact and likelihood. Under each likelihood or impact scale, we can add additional context by selecting Add Context, and you may want to add something along the lines of financial, and then finally the scoring you may want to give this section, for example, £100, £200, etc. And again, this will be based on your entire organization's requirements. We can also delete from this section and take it back to how it would be from standard. We're now going to select Next, and this will take us into our acceptance criteria. At the moment, the only acceptance criteria we have are acceptable and unacceptable. Under this section, you are able to add your own additional criteria if needs be, so we can select Yes here. Choose Add a New Criteria, highlight New Criteria. We can then name this section, so this could now be our disaster area. We'd like to add an additional color to help us differentiate it on the scale, and then we can finally modify the range in which this is going to cover when it comes to your risk assessment score. You may also need to add a description if you need to outline what would fall into a disaster category or what the disaster category is going to outline. Once we're happy with all of this information and our ISMS is essentially completed, we can then hit Finish. Within a matter of seconds, the ISMS will automatically populate this welcome page where you'll then be able to either edit it, remove it, or export it if you need to move it onto maybe an SQL server for multi-user usage, or if you're simply moving your license from one machine to another. Section 2 is going to take us through our first risk assessment. For today's demonstration, we're going to build off of our sample company, as this has been already pre-populated by ourselves here at Vigilant Software and is a good building block for most organizations to use for their own ISMS. We're going to select Assess Risk here, and this will open up a secondary page in just a moment, like so. And a quick introduction to this page. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to view your individual segments of your risk assessment by owner. We can drop down this menu and separate it into groups such as building, sensitive, information, intangible, etc. You may also want to just view it by asset level alone without having the risk assessment or risk assessors being viewed. And then finally, we can separate them into scenarios. So this may be, for example, a basement. You may have a number of assets within that area, but they may fall subject or foul to an individual piece of equipment failing, such as air conditioning. That will then have a scenario effect as opposed to an individual risk assessment issue. We're going to leave ourselves on owner today and expand upon our CIO section here. Under here, on the sample company, all of the assets have been automatically assigned to the CIO. And if we need to add an individual one, we can just select CIO. We can come to the top here and add a new asset if you need to whilst you're going through your individual risk assessment. Today, however, and part of the new vsRisk 3.0 software, we have a wizard. So we're going to select our wizard icon here. This will open up a separate page again. And this is essentially a very nice and easy step-by-step stage in which you can go ahead and do an individual risk assessment on a particular asset. So today's asset we're going to be choosing is going to be laptops. Under this section here, you'll be able to quick search any items. And again, you'll also be able to add new assets if you need to whilst you're going through your risk assessment for the first time. By selecting assets, it will automatically pull through the type of the asset, who the owner of it is, if there's been any classifications given to it, and if you went a little bit further and put identification or location, that would also be pulled through automatically as well. We're going to select next on here, and now we're going to choose our threats. So these are all already built into the tool itself. Obviously, you may want to add in your own threats and vulnerabilities, which can all be done under the settings menu, which we'll come to a little bit later on. Again, very much like the assets section, you will be able to run a quick search, but today we're going to use illegal use of software, select next, and then we're going to choose our vulnerability based on that threat. So the one we're going to use for the example purpose today will be inadequate application controls, select next, and now we come to our initial risk. This will be based off the score grid that you gave when you created your first ISMS. Along here, we've got our score grid, which is based on the sample company's criteria. And above there is where you're going to be scoring your initial risk. Each one of these sections can be toggled on or off, as not all assets require a score based on confidentiality, availability, or integrity. We're going to leave them all turned on for today's demo. And we're going to select the edit icon here, indicated by the pencil icon. And then we're just going to select all of these to be in an absolute maximum unacceptable state. We're then going to select next, and this will then take us into our response section. This is typically or commonly known in the industry as the 4 T's, so you'd have treat, transfer, terminate, or tolerate. However, under this section, we've given it a title of modify, share, retain, and avoid, with a description of each one below the header. Below there, you'll then need to pick which one you're going to choose. So in this case, we're going to use modify. So we're actually choosing to treat this risk, and then we're going to go ahead and leave a comment. So we're going to put something very basic here and just put improved UAC, so user account access, and select next. And then this will give us the option to choose from our controls. So as you recall at the beginning, we chose to deselect all of the control sets except for the 27001-2013 controls. So that is all that we're going to have available to us. For today's demonstration, we're not going to go too much into detail as to which one we're using. However, we do have a search function at the top here, and beside each control, there will be a description of that particular control as well. We can use the plus icon to add that to our risk assessment, and we can add multiples of the controls, and we can also go ahead and remove the ones that we no longer require. We're now going to select next, and this is going to take us into our residual risk section, where again we need to use the same score grid that we used on the initial risk. However, this time, once the control and the response have been taken into account, we're going to set this now to be in a completely acceptable criteria range. We'll select next, and this is the last step we're going to come to, so we need to choose who the risk owner is. So in this scenario, we're going to use it as the CIO. If we need to add any comments, we can do so under this section, and then we can pop in here additional information and whether that has been actioned, yes or no, save, and then that will show up on any subsequent reports you may be pulling from the software. We're going to select finish on here, and this will return us back to our overall risk assessment page. As you can see, the illegal use of software due to inadequate application controls has been automatically pulled through from the risk assessment page we've just run through. If we select this downward arrow here, this will load up a screen where it will allow you to modify individual segments of it without having to run back through that entire risk assessment page again. So we can modify or edit the response under this section. We can edit the risk itself using the edit icon. We can change the before and after treatment scores, and we can also view the controls being taken into account. If we select on these individual controls, you'll be able to have access to whether the control has been implemented, yes or no, and if not, when is it planned for. You'll then also be able to see any supporting documents. The supporting documents will be pulled through from the ISO 27001 toolkit available from IT governance. Alternatively, under the control selection, which we'll come to shortly, you'll be able to add in any of your own supporting documents via this section as well. So once we're happy with all of this, we can return back to this main screen, and that is essentially you going through your first risk assessment, and then moving forward, you'll then go through and do this on each individual asset within your organization. We're now going to close out of here. That will return us back to the home screen, and that would have automatically saved any of the modifications we've made with our sample company ISMS. The next section we're going to come to is going to be the ability to review the controls. By selecting on this icon here, this will open up another new page, like so. And by selecting on this top one here, it will give you an indication of to which risks this has been related to, or which ones are used in this particular control. You'll then be able to go through and select whether it is a business, contractual, statutory, legal, or regulatory requirement. If you select each one of those boxes, you may then need to leave a description based on why that is the case, and then you'll be able to go through and add implementation details. If you need to exclude a particular control from your risk assessment, you need to ensure that every risk that currently holds that control within it has it removed. You'll then be able to select excluded and again leave your description as to why that is being so. Below that section, you'll be able to add in any supporting documentation. So as we saw just a moment ago, this is where you can add in your own supporting documentation, or again, if you're using the ISO 27001 toolkit available from IT governance, that will automatically be pulled through into this section. By adding it into this section, each time you come to use that control, it will automatically pull all of that information through into the particular risk that you're going to be working on. Under this section here, at the moment we're only viewing the ISO 27001 control set. We can jump into any of the others that we have available within the tool, so anything from CSA, PCI, CES and PCI DSS. If we select on one of these different control sets, select on here, and as you can see, because this isn't currently being used within our risk assessment, we can go ahead, choose exclude, and then list why we are choosing to exclude it from our risk assessment. A further detail to items that are not being used in the risk assessment, they will then show any other control sets that may be related to them. So here we can see that there is a partial relevance or partial match to a control within the ISO 27001-2013 control. That, in essence, is a quick overview of the controls viewer. It's essentially a one-stop shop to configure your controls, and then they will no longer need to be done until you come to renew maybe support and documentation. So it's an ideal tool for repeatability. We're going to close off of here. Again, by closing that section, that will automatically save any changes that we made to any of the controls. And now we're going to move on to the dashboard. The dashboard itself is essentially a form over function part of the software. It would be used in instances like presentations to stakeholders or potentially senior management or any of the other risk assessors within your organization. Essentially, the dashboard will give you a top-level view of where you are within your risk assessment. Over here, on the left-hand side, you'll be able to see the number of risks, and you could break that down into by rating or by owner. The next section will be the control status. So if you are running a number of risk assessments within the same tool, you'll be able to differentiate individual control sets, or we can just select all and it will break them down from, again, a very top level point of view. The next section you're going to come to will be the timeline. So again, if you're putting any implementation dates for the future on particular controls, they will automatically be pulled through into this section. So whoever you're presenting this to, whether it's senior management stakeholders or again, like I said, any of the other risk assessors, you'll be able to go through and make a roadmap plan as to how you're moving along with your risk assess. The next section will then be the risk assessment, the risk response. And again, this is going to refer back to that screen that we were going through where you saw modify, share, retain, and avoid. Here it refers back to the treat, terminate, tolerate, transfer. Finally, on this section, you'll then have an overall summary. And then in the middle section here, you will see the top 8 risks within your ISMS organization that you've created. And as you may have noticed around each one of these, there's a question mark, and these are simply just to give you hints or tips as to what that section is trying to display. Should you need to export this and forward on to any other external stakeholders, you can do so by selecting the export to PDF document here. And again, this will just take a snapshot of the screen you're displaying at this moment and allow you to share it with other individuals within your company. We're now going to close out of this section, as again I mentioned that was purely for form over function, and we're going to move on to the reporting section. We're going to select print reports, and we'll make this screen a little bit larger for you. And these are the 6 individual reports that the vsRisk tool will be able to populate for you. Each report will be given an individual version number based on when you are choosing to export it for your auditing purposes. And the 6 that you'll have available to you will be Statement of Applicability, Risk Treatment Plan, Risk Assessment Report, Risk Summary Report, Comments Report, and a Control Usage Report. Each one will be able to dig down individually based on the risk owner, the type of control, whether it's been implemented, whether it's planned or not planned, or even potentially overdue. So this is a good way for the individuals to keep track of how the risk assessment is going on. This section of the tool, we're just simply going to be looking at our statement of applicability today. Under the statement of applicability, once this has been compiled and pulled through from the sample company, you'll then be able to drill down based on the control set you want the statement to be viewed upon. So at the moment we've got it set for ISO 27001 2013, and once the report has been pulled, we can then go through there and drop down to maybe choose something like PCI, etc. So under your statement of applicability, at the top you'll be given your ISMS name, the organization, when you've chosen to publish this report, the version number, and the publisher. If we need to export this, we can do so under here. So we've got PDF, XPS, XL 2013, and XL 2007. You can also export this into raw data should you need to have further modifications on here, such as maybe introducing your own company logo or even your own version numbers if you need to keep conformity within your company. We're now going to close out of the report section by selecting the X icon, and this again will return us to this main home screen. The final section we're going to come to today, as mentioned at the beginning, is going to be our settings menu. The settings menu is essentially to either recap over the ISMS you've created, it will allow you to modify any user accounts, it will allow you to set up synchronization to maybe an SQL server or even to our own CyberComply portal, and it will also allow you to import or export your own databases. This first section under System is essentially the ISMS creation steps you would have gone through at the beginning. So to begin with, we have the acceptance criteria, we have our impact and likelihood scales, we have the control sets we're choosing to work off, we have our classifications, so how you're choosing to classify an individual asset, we have the type, again this is how you're going to separate your type of assets, your risk calculation, where within the tool you'll be able to choose impact plus likelihood -1 and etc. And below there you can then choose your example to give you what your risk score is going to look like. We can then change the requirements. So this is a section where you can toggle on or off whether doing the initial risk will then impact the residual risk, or if you're going to do that at a later point, this is where you can toggle those sections on or off. And then finally the toolkits. So as I mentioned earlier, we were looking at the ISO 27001. If we select on here, you'll be able to see sample documentation. This is of course mainly watermarked or blacked out under the implementation guidance section, but should you have a toolkit, you'll be able to import it directly from the zip file, and that'll automatically associate itself with the controls within the tool itself. The next section under settings is our admin section. Here, if you are the head organization administrator on a multi-user account, you'll be able to modify how users log into the tool, their passwords, what access they may have, especially. So if we select on our CIO, if you are acting as the organization administrator, you'll be able to modify whether they're an asset owner, which essentially only gives them access to their own assets and their own risks, a consultant, That will act in very much the same way as an administrator. And finally, revoked is used for if there's a position that is being changed or being updated. You may wish to revoke access to that particular user until that position has been refilled again, and then you can move them back into their original role of asset owner or administrator. By using the revoked section, it doesn't delete any of the risks or any of the risk assessments that they've gone through previously. Also under this section, you'll be able to toggle on integrated security if you're linking this up with your Active Directory. That way the individual users will not need to keep track of their username and password to logging in. It'll automatically pull that through from their Windows account. The next section under administration is going to be audit history. This is essentially just going to keep a log from the organization administrator's point of view as to when individuals have logged into the vsRisk tool, if there's been any modifications, and if you choose to leave a comment to that, you can do over here on the right hand side. Finally, under administration, you will have your license. This can be copied to clipboard to allow you to keep a local copy of the file. You can alternatively use this to uninstall the license to allow you to free up access to then move it to another machine or enable access for another user within your organization. The next tab along here is database. If you're using this as a standalone, so you are going to be the sole and only user of the software and the only risk assessor, this will automatically configure itself to the program data file on your C drive. If, however, you're going to be using multi-user and therefore subsequently connecting it to an SQL server, this is where you'll be able to configure the connection, test the connection, point it into the right file location, and then set up which authentication your server uses, whether that be Windows authentication or an SQL authentication. The next section here will be the area where you'd be looking to import your own assets. So if you are already working off of an Excel spreadsheet, you're likely already going to have your own asset register within that file. Providing they have the same headers as we have outlined here, once you import them, they'll automatically be available to you as I demonstrated earlier within the risk assessment page. The next section here will be the ability to export assets. So again, if you just want to keep an offline copy of your asset register, you can do so. Equally, you're able to do that with our pre-populated items, as you can already see here within the tool. The next step will be the backup and restore function, a relatively self-explanatory section. However, we would recommend strongly to perform a monthly or bi-weekly backup or restore, just to ensure that if you are looking to move machines or potentially update machines on a regular basis, you'll always have a backup of your work to date. The next section will be threats, vulnerabilities, and controls. Each one of these are already populated based on our knowledge of what you may be requiring, such as threats and vulnerabilities, and also controls. You'll have the control sets available to you, as again we showed at the beginning of the demonstration. Each one of these will allow you to add in your own specific requirements. So if your own organization has their own threats, their own vulnerabilities, or even their own controls, you can pull them through into this section, then go into the control review selection, add that control there, add any supporting documentation, and again that will automatically be available to you when you go through and do your risk assessment. The next section here will be synchronization. This is a free of use tool. Essentially, when you register your account using your email, name, last name, and organization, you'll be presented an API key. You can then link that account with our Cyber Comply portal, and in turn that will ensure that all of the control sets and any of the controls that you're going to be working on are continuously kept up to date, which is a reason as to why vsRisk will need to maintain an internet connection during its usage. Finally, we will come to our help section. Under here, there is just basic information that is primarily used for support functions, such as the build number, the version number, obviously our copyright and our web address, and then finally our support section, which is essentially where you'll be pointed towards our very in-depth FAQ page, or finally the contact information to contact us directly if you have something of a bit more of a niche requirement. That, ladies and gentlemen, has brought me to the end of the demonstration for today. I hope you found it helpful, and we look forward to hearing from you very shortly. Thank you for your time.